Okay, let's dive into the story. It all started on a sunny afternoon in a quiet little neighborhood. The sun was shining bright, making everything look happy and warm. Birds were chirping their little songs, flying from tree to tree. Kids were laughing and running around, playing tag or riding their bikes up and down the street. And then there was this soft sound like a little ting-ting coming from my wind chimes. They were hanging on my porch, swaying back and forth in the breeze. I loved that sound. It was peaceful and made me smile every time I heard it. My name's Jake, by the way. Hi. I'm just a regular guy who likes simple things. I love sitting on my porch with a cold glass of lemonade, feeling the sun on my face, and listening to those wind chimes. To me, that's what a good day feels like: peace and quiet. No worries, no noise, just calm. But guess what? That peace wasn't going to last. Nope, not even close. Something big was about to happen, and I didn't even see it coming. See, there was someone watching me. Not just watching me, but staring at those wind chimes like they were the worst thing in the world. I didn't know it yet, but this person was about to turn my quiet little life upside down. And who was this person? Her name was Karen. But not just any Karen, oh no. She was the HOA Karen. Now, if you don't know what HOA means, it stands for Homeowners Association. It's a group that makes rules for the neighborhood, like how tall your grass can be or what color your house can be painted. And Karen? She was the boss of it all. The president. She took her job way too seriously. Karen wasn't like most people. She didn't just sit back and enjoy life. Nope. She was the kind of neighbor who carried a ruler around to measure your grass. I'm not kidding. If your grass was half an inch too long, she'd write you a note saying, "Cut it." If your mailbox leaned even a tiny bit to the left, she'd leave a letter saying, "Fix it." She loved rules more than anything else, and she made sure everyone followed them. Everyone was a little scared of her, to be honest. Nobody wanted to get on Karen's bad side. Now, here's the funny part: I'd only been living in this neighborhood for 1 month. Just 30 days. When I moved in, I thought, this place looks nice. Quiet streets, friendly people, perfect for me. I didn't want any trouble. I wasn't trying to stand out or make anyone mad. I figured I'd just blend in, like a chameleon hiding on a tree branch. Boy, was I wrong about that. I wasn't blending in at all, not to Karen. She had her eyes on me from the very first day I showed up. Why? Because of those wind chimes. Those wind chimes were my favorite thing. They were shiny and silver, with little tubes that clinked together when the wind blew. I hung them up on my porch the day I moved in, thinking, this'll make my house feel like home. Every time I heard that ting-ting, I'd smile and feel happy. To me, they were just a little piece of joy. But to Karen? Oh, they were like a big, loud alarm clock waking her up from a nap. She hated them. I mean, really hated them. And I had no idea they were going to make her so mad that she'd start a war with me. So, here I was, sitting on my porch that sunny afternoon, sipping my lemonade. The wind chimes were singing their little song, the birds were chirping, and the kids were laughing. Everything felt perfect. I didn't know it yet, but Karen was watching me from across the street. She was standing there, arms crossed, staring at my house like a hawk watching a mouse. Those wind chimes. They were about to become her biggest enemy. And me? I was about to become the guy she'd try to boss around. Let me ask you something real quick: what would you do if your neighbor hated something as simple as wind chimes? Would you take them down to keep the peace? Or would you leave them up, just to see what happens? Think about it for a second, because this story's about to get super exciting. Stick with me, okay? You're not going to believe what happens next. It's juicy, like the best kind of gossip you hear at school. Let's rewind a bit so you can picture it. My house was small but cozy. It had a little porch with a rocking chair where I liked to sit. The wind chimes hung right above me, catching the sunlight and sparkling like tiny stars. Across the street was Karen's house. Hers was bigger, with perfect flowers in the yard and a mailbox that stood straight as a soldier. She kept everything neat and tidy, like a picture in a magazine. You could tell she spent a lot of time making sure it all looked just right. The first time I saw Karen, I didn't think much of it. I waved at her when I was carrying boxes into my house on moving day. She didn't wave back. She just stood there, looking at me with squinty eyes, like she was trying to figure me out. I thought, okay, maybe she's just shy. Nope. She wasn't shy. She was suspicious. She didn't trust new people, and I was the newest guy around. A few days after I moved in, I started noticing little things. Like how Karen would walk by my house every morning, super slow, looking at everything. She'd stare at my grass, my porch, my front door like she was a detective searching for clues. I didn't know why she cared so much. I mean, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I mowed my lawn, I kept my trash cans in the garage, and I didn't throw loud parties. I was just a regular guy with a regular house. But to Karen, I was trouble. And those wind chimes. They were the spark that lit the fire. That sunny afternoon, I was sitting there, rocking in my chair. The lemonade was cold in my hand, and the ice cubes clinked against the glass. The wind chimes made their sweet little ting-ting sound, and I closed my eyes for a second, just enjoying it. I didn't know Karen was about to make her move. I didn't know she'd been watching me all this time, getting madder and madder every time she heard those chimes. To her, that sound wasn't peaceful, it was like nails on a chalkboard. Here's the thing about Karen, she wasn't just picky. She was bossy. Super bossy. She didn't just want rules, she wanted everyone to obey her rules. If she didn't like something, she'd make sure it disappeared. One neighbor told me she once made a guy take down his basketball hoop because she said it was too noisy. Another time, she fined a lady for hanging a birdhouse because it was too colorful. Karen didn't mess around. She had power in the neighborhood, and she loved using it. So, when I hung up those wind chimes, I didn't think it was a big deal. To me, they were harmless, just a little decoration that made a pretty sound. But to Karen, they were a challenge. A big, shiny, noisy challenge. She couldn't stand them, and she couldn't stand that I didn't ask her permission first. In her mind, I was breaking the rules, even though there wasn't a rule about wind chimes. Not yet, anyway. That afternoon, as I sat there sipping my lemonade, I had no clue what was coming. I didn't know Karen was plotting against me. I didn't know she'd already decided those wind chimes had to go and that she'd do whatever it took to make that happen. I was just a guy enjoying his day, minding my own business. But Karen? She was about to turn my quiet little world into a big, loud mess. Let's stop for a second. Imagine you're me, sitting on that porch. The sun's shining, the wind chimes are tingling, and everything feels great. Then you look across the street and see your neighbor staring at you, looking mad. What do? Do you wave and say hi? Do you ignore her? Or do you start wondering why she's so grumpy? I didn't do any of that. I just kept sipping my lemonade, totally clueless. Big mistake. The truth is, I should have paid more attention. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was a force of nature. Like a tornado or a thunderstorm, she could roll in and wreck everything if she wanted to. And those wind chimes. They were the spark that set her off. She didn't see them as pretty or peaceful. She saw them as a problem she had to fix. So, there I was, rocking in my chair, listening to the ting-ting of the chimes. The breeze felt nice, the lemonade tasted sweet, and the day seemed perfect. Across the street, Karen was watching. Her eyes were narrowed, her arms were crossed, and her brain was spinning with ideas. She didn't like me. She didn't like my chimes. And she was about to do something about it? What would you do if you were me? Would you take the chimes down to avoid trouble? Or would you keep them up, just to see what happens? I didn't even get the chance to decide, because Karen was already moving. She was fast, she was sneaky, and she was mad. And that's where the story really starts to heat up. Stick around, because you're not going to believe what she does next. It's wild. Okay, here's where things start to get exciting. A few days after I hung up those wind chimes on my porch, something happened. I was just sitting there, minding my own business, when I looked up and saw Karen. She was standing across the street, staring at me. Not just looking, glaring. Her eyes were all squinted, like she was super mad. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest, and her lips were pressed together in a thin, straight line. She looked like a grumpy cat who didn't get its food. I didn't know what her problem was, but I was about to find out. Karen didn't just stand there for long. Oh no. She started walking no, storming right over to my house. Her feet hit the ground hard, like she was trying to scare the grass. She marched up to my porch, pointed at my wind chimes, and snapped, "Those things are a noise violation." Her voice was loud and sharp, like a teacher yelling at a kid who forgot their homework. She kept pointing at the chimes, her finger shaking a little, and said, "They're disrupting the peace." I just sat there, holding my lemonade, and blinked at her. Disrupting the peace? I didn't get it. My wind chimes were so quiet. They made this soft little ting-ting sound when the wind blew, like a tiny bell. It wasn't loud at all, not like a car horn or a barking dog. To me, it was a happy sound, not a problem. So I tried to stay nice. I smiled a little and said, "Karen, they're just wind chimes. They're not loud." I thought maybe she'd calm down if I explained it. But nope. Karen didn't want to hear it. Her face turned even grumpier, and she shook her head fast. "No way," she huffed. "They're too noisy, and I can't stand them." Then she said the big thing, "I'll report you to the HOA." The HOA, that's the Homeowners Association, remember? It's the group she was in charge of. She made it sound like a huge threat, like she was calling the principal on me. Then she turned around, stomped her feet again, and marched back to her house. She acted like she'd just won a big fight, but I wasn't even fighting. I watched her go, and I shrugged my shoulders. Okay, I thought. She's mad, but it's not a big deal. I figured she was just having a bad day. Maybe she'd forget about it by tomorrow. So I took another sip of my lemonade and listened to the ting-ting of my chimes. They sounded just as nice as ever, and I wasn't worried. Not yet, anyway. But then, the next day came, and oh boy, things changed fast. I went to check my mailbox like I do every afternoon, and there was a letter inside. It wasn't a normal letter, like a birthday card or something fun. No, this one looked serious. It was in a fancy white envelope with big, bold letters on it that said HOA. I opened it up, and guess what it said? Remove the wind chimes or face a fine. A fine. That means I'd have to pay money if I didn't take them down. And at the bottom of the letter, there was a signature, Karen. Of course it was her. She wasn't kidding when she said she'd report me. I stood there by my mailbox, holding that letter, and I couldn't believe it. All this fuss over some wind chimes. They were just little metal tubes that made a pretty sound. But to Karen, they were a huge problem. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was like the queen of the neighborhood. She loved being in charge, and she loved telling people what to do. If she didn't like something, she'd make sure it went away. And right now, she didn't like me or my chimes. I started thinking about what the neighbors had told me about Karen. They'd whisper about her when she wasn't around, like they were afraid she'd hear them. One guy said she fined him because he planted flowers in his yard that she thought were ugly. Ugly flowers. Can you believe that? Another lady told me Karen made her pay money because her car was parked too close to the curb. Not on the grass, not blocking the road, just a tiny bit too close for Karen's rules. Everyone knew she was strict, but I didn't think she'd come after me so fast. I'd only been here a month. So there I was, staring at that letter, and I felt a little mad. I didn't want to take my wind chimes down. They weren't hurting anybody. They made me happy, and I liked hearing them when I sat on my porch. Why should I have to get rid of them just because Karen said so? I wasn't going to let her boss me around like that. Nope, not me. Those chimes were staying right where they were, hanging on my porch, shining in the sun. But here's the thing, Karen didn't know I had a plan. A little trick up my sleeve, like a secret card in a game. I wasn't going to tell her yet, though. Oh no, I was going to wait. I wanted to see what she'd do next, because I had a feeling this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to give up easy. She loved a fight, and she loved winning even more. Little did she know, I wasn't going to make it so simple for her. Let's rewind a bit so you can picture it all. It was a warm morning when Karen came stomping over. The sun was up, the birds were singing, and I was just relaxing. My porch isn't big, it's got a rocking chair, a little table for my lemonade, and those wind chimes hanging above me. They're silver and shiny, and they sparkle when the light hits them. Across the street, Karen's house looked perfect, like always. Her grass was short, her flowers were neat, and her mailbox stood straight. She worked hard to keep it that way, and she expected everyone else to do the same. When she yelled at me about the chimes, I didn't yell back. I stayed calm because I didn't want to make it worse. But inside, I was thinking, this is silly. I mean, who gets so mad about wind chimes? They're not loud like a drum or a siren. They're gentle, like a whisper. But Karen didn't care. To her, they were breaking the rules, her rules. And she couldn't stand that. After she stormed off, I sat there for a while, rocking in my chair. The chimes kept making their soft ting-ting sound, and I smiled. I wasn't going to let her ruin my day. But then that letter showed up, and I knew she wasn't playing around. She really meant it. She wanted those chimes gone, and she'd use her HOA power to make it happen. I started wondering why she cared so much. Was it really about the noise? Or was it something else? Maybe she just didn't like me because I was new. Maybe she didn't like that I didn't ask her before I hung them up. Whatever it was, she was on a mission. And me? I was starting to get ready for a fight, not a loud one, but a smart one. The neighbors knew Karen was tough. They'd seen her in action before. Like that guy with the flowers, he planted some bright yellow ones because he liked them. Karen said they were too messy and made him pull them out. He had to pay $50. Then there was the car guy. His tire was maybe an inch too close to the curb, and she fined him $25. She'd walk around with her little notebook, writing down every tiny thing she didn't like. People called her the rule queen behind her back. I didn't want to be her next target, but it was too late. That letter in my hand proved it. She was coming for me, and she wasn't going to stop. But I wasn't scared, not yet. I had those wind chimes, and I loved them. They weren't going anywhere. I'd keep them up, no matter what she said. So there I stood by my mailbox, holding that HOA letter. The paper felt heavy, like it was full of her anger. Remove the wind chimes or face a fine, it said again in my head. I could almost hear Karen's voice reading it out loud, all bossy and mean. But I just folded it up, put it in my pocket, and walked back to my porch. I sat down, took a sip of lemonade, and listened to the ting-ting. Karen thought she could scare me. She thought I'd give up fast. But she didn't know me very well. I wasn't going to back down so easy. Those chimes were mine, and this was my house. She could huff and puff all she wanted, but I wasn't taking them down. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever unless I had to. And even then, I had that little trick I mentioned. Something she'd never see coming. The fight was just starting, and I could feel it. Karen was mad, and I was ready. What would she do next? Would she come back yelling? Would she send more letters? I didn't know yet, but I wasn't worried. I had my lemonade, my porch, and my wind chimes. And I had a plan, a secret one. She'd find out soon enough, but not yet. For now, I'd just sit back and wait. So there I was, sitting on my porch after finding that HOA letter in my mailbox. The wind chimes were still making their soft ting-ting sound, and I was still holding my lemonade. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and everything seemed okay except for Karen. She was across the street, probably smiling to herself, thinking she'd scared me good with that letter. But I wasn't scared. Nope. I was a little mad, sure, but mostly I was thinking, this is ridiculous. Wind chimes aren't a big deal. They're not loud or annoying. They're just nice. Why was she making such a fuss? I rocked back and forth in my chair, staring at that letter I'd stuffed in my pocket. It felt like a challenge, like Karen was saying, I'm the boss, and you have to listen to me. But I didn't want to listen. I didn't want to take my wind chimes down just because she said so. They weren't hurting anybody. They were just hanging there, doing their little dance in the breeze. I decided right then, those chimes were staying. Karen could write all the letters she wanted, I wasn't giving up that easy. Let's talk about that letter for a second. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was official, like something a grown-up would get from a teacher or a boss. It had big words like violation and fine, but I knew what it meant. Karen wanted me to obey her, or I'd have to pay money. And who signed it? She did. Her name was right there at the bottom, written in black ink, Karen. She was so proud of it, you could tell. She loved being the HOA president. It made her feel important, like she ruled the whole neighborhood. I started thinking about what I'd heard from the neighbors again. They told me stories about Karen crazy stuff. Like how she fined that guy for his flowers. His name was Tom, I think. He planted these bright yellow flowers in his yard because they made him happy. But Karen didn't like them. She said they were ugly and messy, even though they were just flowers. She made him dig them up and pay $50. Poor Tom didn't even argue, he just did it because he didn't want trouble. Then there was the car thing. Another neighbor, a lady named Sue, parked her car on the street one day. It was a little close to the curb, like, maybe an inch too close. Not a big deal, right? Wrong. Karen saw it, wrote it down in her little notebook, and sent Sue a letter. Move your car or pay $25, it said. Sue was so mad, but she moved it anyway. She told me later, Karen's always watching. She never stops. That's what made Karen special. She didn't just make rules, she lived for them. She carried that notebook everywhere, writing down every tiny thing she didn't like. If your trash can was out too long, she'd write it down. If your dog barked once, she'd write it down. If your mailbox wasn't perfect, she'd write it down. Then she'd send you a letter or knock on your door, telling you to fix it. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her, and most of them were a little scared of her. But me? I wasn't scared, not really. I was new here, sure, but I wasn't going to let her push me around. I liked my wind chimes, and I liked my porch. This was my house, not hers. So when I got that letter, I didn't run inside and take the chimes down. Nope. I just sat there, sipping my lemonade, listening to the ting-ting. I wasn't going to let her win that fast. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Why was she so mad about those chimes? Was it really the noise? They weren't loud at all. I mean, you could barely hear them unless you were right next to them. Maybe it was something else. Maybe she didn't like me because I was new. Maybe she didn't like that I didn't ask her first. Or maybe she just liked being mean. I didn't know yet, but I was starting to wonder. The day after the letter came, I saw Karen again. I was outside watering my grass, trying to keep it short so she wouldn't bug me about that, too. She walked by, super slow, staring at my porch. Her eyes went right to the wind chimes, and her face got all scrunchy, like she'd just smelled something bad. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she was still mad. Really mad. She kept walking, but I knew she wasn't done with me. That letter was just the start. I went back inside and sat on my porch again. The chimes were still there, shining in the sun, making their little sound. I liked them even more now, just because Karen hated them. It was like they were my buddies, sticking with me no matter what. But I knew Karen wasn't going to stop. She'd probably send another letter. Or maybe she'd come back and yell some more. She wasn't the type to give up, she liked winning too much. I started thinking about what I could do. I didn't want to fight with her, not like yelling or anything. That's not me. I'm a calm guy. I like peace, remember. But I also didn't want to lose my chimes. They were special to me. So I decided I'd wait and see what she did next. I wasn't going to take them down, but I wasn't going to make a big scene either. I'd just sit back, watch, and be ready. Because I had a little secret, a trick I was keeping quiet about. Karen didn't know it yet, but I wasn't as helpless as she thought. Let's paint the picture again. My house was small and cozy, with a little porch out front. The wind chimes hung there, silver and pretty, catching the light. Across the street was Karen's house, big, neat, perfect. She kept it that way all the time, like it was her job. She'd water her flowers, trim her grass, and make sure everything looked just right. Then she'd walk around the neighborhood, checking on everyone else. She was like a teacher keeping an eye on the playground, ready to catch anyone breaking her rules. That day she yelled at me, she'd caught me off guard. I was just sitting there, enjoying my day, when she stormed over. "Those things are a noise violation," she said, pointing at the chimes like they were a monster. I didn't know what to say at first, I just blinked at her. "They're disrupting the peace," she added, her voice all loud and bossy. I tried to be nice. "Karen, they're just wind chimes." "They're not loud," I said, keeping my voice soft. But she didn't care. She huffed, said she'd report me, and stomped off. Then came the letter. I found it the next day, and it made everything real. This wasn't just Karen being grumpy, it was Karen using her power. She wanted me to know she was serious. Remove the wind chimes or face a fine, it said. I could almost hear her saying it in her mean voice. But I didn't panic. I didn't run to take them down. I just put the letter in my pocket and sat back down on my porch. The neighbors' stories kept popping into my head. Tom and his flowers. Sue and her car. All the little things Karen had done to boss people around. She loved that HOA job, it gave her control. And now she was trying to control me. But I wasn't Tom or Sue. I wasn't going to give in so fast. Those chimes were staying, and I'd figure out a way to deal with her. The sun started going down that day, and I watched it from my porch. The sky turned orange and pink, and the wind chimes glowed a little in the light. They sounded so pretty soft and calm, like a lullaby. I took another sip of lemonade and thought, Karen can try all she wants, but I'm not scared. She thought she had all the power, but I had something she didn't expect. Not yet, anyway. The next morning, I saw her again. She was outside her house, watering her perfect flowers. She looked over at my porch, saw the chimes still hanging there, and made a face. I waved at her, just to be nice, but she didn't wave back. She turned away fast, like she couldn't even look at me. I laughed a little to myself. She was so mad, and I hadn't even done anything yet. I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't going to stop with one letter. She'd keep coming, maybe with more letters, maybe with something bigger. She hated losing, and right now, she wasn't winning. Those chimes were still up, and I was still sitting there, enjoying them. That probably made her madder than anything. So I waited. I rocked in my chair, listened to the ting-ting, and kept my eyes open. Karen was planning something, I could feel it. But I was ready. I had my trick, my little secret, and I'd use it when the time was right. For now, I'd let her think she was in charge. Let her write her letters and make her threats. She didn't know what was coming. Not yet. The tension was building, like a storm getting ready to break. Karen was mad, I was stubborn, and those wind chimes were right in the middle of it all. What would she do next? I didn't know, but I wasn't backing down. This was my porch, my house, my chimes. And I was going to fight for them in my own quiet way. Okay, things were about to get way crazier. After Karen sent me that whole letter about my wind chimes, I thought maybe she'd chill out a little. Nope. The next week was wild. She didn't stop, she got even madder. Every single day, Karen started showing up at my house. Like, every day. She'd march over from across the street, bang on my door with her fist, and yell at me. Take those chimes down, she'd shout, her voice all loud and grumpy. I can't sleep. I can't think. I'd just stand there in my doorway, looking at her. She'd be so mad, her face all scrunched up, her hands on her hips. But I didn't yell back. Nope, I stayed calm. I'd smile a little and say, they're staying, Karen. That's it, just those 3 words. Simple, right? But oh boy, it made her so mad. Her face would turn bright red, like a tomato, and she'd mutter stuff under her breath. Rules are rules, she'd say, or you'll be sorry. Then she'd spin around and storm off, her feet stomping the ground like she was trying to break it. This happened every day for a whole week. Every single day. I'd be sitting on my porch, sipping my lemonade, listening to the soft ting-ting of my wind chimes, and then bam, there she was. Banging on my door, yelling about how my chimes were ruining her life. They're too noisy, she'd scream. They keep me up all night. I didn't get it. They weren't loud at all. You could barely hear them unless you were super close. But Karen acted like they were a big drum or a car horn blasting in her ears. I kept smiling and saying, they're staying, Karen, because I wasn't going to let her win. Those chimes were mine, and I loved them. Plus, it was kind of funny watching her get so worked up over something so small. She'd huff and puff, turn red, and stomp away every time. It was like a little show, and I had the best seat in the house. But then, one night, things got creepy. Really creepy. It was dark outside, and I was inside my house, looking out the window. The moon was up, and everything was quiet except for my wind chimes, making their tiny ting-ting sound. I glanced at my yard, and there she was, Karen. She was standing right there, in my yard, holding a flashlight. The light was shining on my wind chimes, making them glow a little. She just stood there, staring at them, not moving. Her face looked serious, like she was planning something bad. Like maybe she wanted to rip them down or smash them. I watched her through the window, and my heart beat a little faster. It was so weird. Why was she in my yard? Why was she staring at my chimes like that? It felt creepy, like something from a spooky story. I didn't go outside, I just stayed quiet and watched. After a minute, she turned off her flashlight and walked back to her house. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was she really going to do something to my chimes? It was freaky. After that night, I started paying more attention to Karen. I didn't trust her anymore, not after seeing her sneak around like that. And that's when I noticed some strange things. Little things, but they added up. Like, Karen started leaving her house at weird times. Not normal times, like morning or afternoon, nope, odd hours. Sometimes it was super late at night, like after midnight. Other times it was really early, before the sun even came up. Every time she left, she was carrying something, big black bags. They looked like trash bags, maybe, but I wasn't sure. They were heavy, too, you could tell by how she carried them. She'd hold them with both hands, kind of struggling, and walk to her car. Then she'd open her trunk and toss them in. I'd watch from my window, trying to figure it out. Were they just trash? Maybe. But why was she taking trash out at midnight? Most people put their trash cans out in the morning, right? It didn't make sense. One time, it got even weirder. I was up late, looking out my window again. I couldn't sleep because I kept thinking about Karen and her flashlight. I saw her come out of her house, carrying one of those big black bags. But this time, it looked really heavy. She was dragging it a little, like it was hard to move. She got to her car, opened the trunk, and shoved it inside. I swear I saw her push it hard, like she was stuffing something big in there. Then she slammed the trunk shut, jumped in her car, and sped off fast. The tires squealed a little, and she was gone. I stood there, staring out the window, my mouth open. What was that about? What was in that bag? Trash doesn't need to be shoved like that, does it? And why was she driving away so fast? My brain started spinning with questions. Was it something normal, like old clothes or junk? Or was it something strange? I didn't know, but it made me curious. Really curious. At first, I didn't think too much about it. I told myself, maybe she's just weird. Maybe she likes taking trash out at night. I mean, Karen was already kind of odd, right? With her rules and her yelling and her flashlight sneaking. So maybe this was just another funny thing about her. I tried to forget it and go back to my normal days, sitting on my porch, sipping lemonade, listening to my chimes. But then it kept happening. Night after night, I'd see her with those bags. Sometimes one bag, sometimes two. Always black, always heavy looking. Always at strange times. And she'd always put them in her trunk and drive away. I started wondering where she was going. Was she throwing stuff away? Was she hiding something? It was like a mystery, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Then came the big moment, the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, I was outside watering my grass. It was a sunny day, and my wind chimes were tinkling in the breeze. I was trying to keep my yard nice so Karen wouldn't bug me about that, too. I looked up, and I saw something crazy: police cars. Not one, but two of them, pulling into our street. My heart jumped a little. Cops? Here. What was going on? I thought maybe they were coming for me. Maybe Karen had called them about my wind chimes. She'd threatened to call 911 before, saying they were disturbing the peace. I got a little nervous, thinking, oh no, is this it? Are they here to make me take them down? But then I saw something even weirder. The cop cars didn't stop at my house. Nope, they went right past me and parked in front of Karen's house. I stood there, holding my watering can, my mouth wide open. The cops got out of their cars, two of them, wearing uniforms and hats. They didn't even look at me. They walked straight up to Karen's door and knocked. Loud. I could hear it from across the street. Bang, bang, bang. Karen opened the door, and her face went white, like she'd seen a ghost. She started talking fast, waving her hands, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. The cops just stood there, looking serious. I couldn't believe it. The police weren't here for me, they were here for Karen. What was going on? My mind raced back to those black bags, the late-night drives, the heavy thing in her trunk. Was this connected? Did someone else see it, too? I didn't know yet, but I knew one thing: this was about to get wild. Really wild. Karen kept yelling at the cops from her porch, pointing at my house sometimes like she was trying to blame me. But the cops didn't care. They stayed calm and kept talking to her. I just watched, my watering can dripping on my shoes, totally shocked. My wind chimes were still there, still making their little ting-ting, but now they felt like part of something bigger. Something strange was happening with Karen, and I was starting to figure it out. Let's rewind a bit so you can see it all. That week had been nuts. Karen banging on my door every day, yelling about the chimes. I can't sleep. I can't think, she'd say, over and over. I'd smile and say, they're staying, every time. She'd get mad and leave, but she never stopped coming back. Then that creepy night with the flashlight, she stood in my yard, staring at the chimes like she wanted to hurt them. I didn't know what she was planning, but it gave me chills. And then those black bags. I'd see her sneak out at night, carrying them to her car. Sometimes she'd look around, like she didn't want anyone to see her. That one time with the heavy bag, she shoved it in her trunk and sped off like she was in a hurry. I didn't think it was a big deal at first, but now, with the cops at her door, it all started to feel suspicious. The neighbors started coming outside, too. They peeked out their windows or stood on their porches, watching the police at Karen's house. Everyone was whispering, wondering what was up. I heard one lady say, she's been acting weird lately. Another guy nodded and said, yeah, I saw her driving off at night. My ears perked up. So I wasn't the only one who noticed. I stayed by my grass, pretending to water it, but really I was watching everything. The cops were still at Karen's door, and she was still talking fast. My wind chimes kept tinkling behind me, and I thought, maybe this isn't just about the chimes anymore. Something bigger was going on, something secret. And Karen? She was right in the middle of it. This was getting crazier by the minute. The banging, the yelling, the flashlight, the bags, and now the cops. It was like a puzzle, and I was starting to see the pieces. I didn't know the whole story yet, but I had a feeling it was going to be big. Really big. And my wind chimes. They were just the start of it all. Okay, this is it, the big moment. It all happened on a Friday afternoon, and trust me, it was wild. I was sitting on my porch, just chilling. The sun was shining, the breeze was blowing, and my wind chimes were making their soft little ting-ting sound. I had my lemonade in my hand, cold and sweet, and I was taking little sips. Everything felt nice and calm, like a perfect day. But then, out of nowhere, here comes Karen. She marched across the street, faster than ever. Her face was mad, like, really mad. Her eyes were all squinty, and her mouth was tight, like she was biting back a scream. She had her phone in her hand, holding it up like a weapon. She stopped right in front of my porch and yelled, "That's it?" Her voice was so loud, I bet the whole neighborhood heard her. "I'm calling 911. You're disturbing the peace." I just sat there, rocking in my chair, and I laughed a little. Not a big laugh, just a tiny one, because it was so silly. Disturbing the peace? With wind chimes. They weren't even loud. So I smiled at her and said, "Go ahead, Karen. Call them." I wasn't scared, I thought it was funny. She'd been yelling about those chimes for days, and now she was going to call the cops? Over this? I didn't think she'd really do it, but oh boy, I was wrong. Karen didn't wait. She pressed buttons on her phone, held it to her ear, and started talking fast and loud. "Hello, 911? Yes, I need help," she screeched. "There's noise pollution here. My neighbor has these awful wind chimes, and they're driving me crazy. He's an awful neighbor, do something." She kept going, waving her free hand around, pointing at me like I was some big bad guy. I just sat there, sipping my lemonade, watching her. She looked so sure of herself, like she'd finally won. I didn't move. I didn't say anything else. I just waited. The wind chimes kept singing their little song ting ting, ting ting, and I thought, okay, let's see what happens. Karen stood there, smirking at me, her phone still in her hand. She thought the cops were going to come and tell me off. She thought she'd get her way, like always. But things were about to get way crazier than she expected. 2 minutes later I counted in my head a police car rolled up. Its lights weren't flashing, but it was real. A cop car, right there on our street. Karen's smirk got bigger. She crossed her arms and looked at me like, see? I told you. I didn't say anything, I just watched. Then, guess what? Another police car pulled in behind the first one. 2 cop cars now? Karen's smirk was huge, she was so happy. But then oh boy, here came a third car. 3 police cars, all parked right there, in front of our houses. Karen's smirk started to fade. She looked confused, like she didn't know what was happening. 3 cars? That's a lot for some wind chimes. I could see her thinking, wait a minute, but she didn't say it out loud. Me. I just kept sipping my lemonade, rocking in my chair, waiting to see what was next. The wind chimes kept going ting-ting like nothing was wrong. The cops got out of their cars, 3 of them, all wearing uniforms with shiny badges. They didn't even look at me. Not one glance. They walked right past my house, straight toward Karen's. Her face changed fast. That big smirk? Gone. Her eyes got wide, and her mouth opened a little, like she was shocked. The cops stopped in front of her, and one of them, a tall guy with a serious face, said, "Ma'am, we need to speak with you. Now." His voice was calm but strong, like he wasn't messing around. Karen's face went white, like, super pale, like she'd seen a ghost. She stammered, what? This is about him." She pointed at me, her finger shaking a little. "He's the one with the chimes. He's the problem." She was trying so hard to blame me, waving her phone around, her voice all high and squeaky. But the cop just shook his head. "No, ma'am," he said. "It's about the complaints we've gotten, about you." Boom. That was it, the big surprise. Karen's mouth dropped open, and she looked like she might fall over. Complaints about her? Not me? She didn't know what to say. She just stood there, staring at the cops, her phone slipping a little in her hand. I couldn't help it, I smiled a tiny bit. Not a mean smile, just a wow, this is wild smile. Because it was wild. The cops weren't here for my wind chimes, they were here for Karen. Here's the thing, I wasn't the only one who'd been watching Karen. Turns out, the neighbors had been keeping an eye on her, too. For weeks, they'd been calling the police about strange stuff going on at her house. They'd smelled weird smells coming from her place, like something stinky, maybe trash, or something worse. They'd seen her driving off late at night with those big black bags I told you about. And they'd noticed her acting sneaky, like she didn't want anyone to see what she was up to. And me? I'd seen stuff, too. Remember that creepy night when I saw her in my yard with a flashlight, staring at my chimes? That wasn't the only weird thing. A few nights ago, I couldn't sleep, so I looked out my window. It was super late, like midnight, and there was Karen, in her backyard. She had a shovel, and she was digging. Digging in the dark, all by herself. I couldn't see what she was burying, but it looked heavy. She kept looking around, like she was scared someone would catch her. I didn't know what it meant at first. I thought maybe she was planting something, like flowers. But at midnight? With a big heavy bag? That didn't make sense. So I got curious. Really curious. The next day, I called the police just quietly, not making a big deal. I said, "Hey, my neighbor's been acting weird. She's digging in her yard at night and carrying big bags. Maybe you should check it out." I didn't tell anyone else, not even the neighbors. I just waited. And now, here we were. 3 cop cars, right in front of Karen's house. She was still stammering, trying to talk her way out of it. "This is crazy," she yelled. "It's his fault. Those chimes are the problem." But the cops didn't listen. They started walking toward her door, and one of them said, "Ma'am, we need to look inside." Karen's eyes got even wider, and she backed up a little, like she didn't want them to go in. I stayed on my porch, sipping my lemonade, watching it all. The wind chimes kept going ting-ting, ting-ting like they didn't care about any of this. And you know what? They didn't. The chimes were just the spark, the little thing that started it all. Karen got so mad about them that she kept coming over, yelling and banging on my door. But while she was busy being mad at me, everyone else was noticing her weird stuff. The real fire, the big trouble, was about to burn her down, not me. Let's rewind a bit so you can see how it all came together. That Friday afternoon started so normal. I was on my porch, enjoying my day. The chimes were singing, the lemonade was cold, and I wasn't bothering anybody. Then Karen marched over, screaming about 911. She called them, thinking she'd win. She thought the cops would come and tell me to take the chimes down. She smirked at me, so sure of herself. But then, surprise, 3 cop cars showed up. Not 1, not 2, but 3. Karen's smirk faded fast when they didn't come to me. They went to her. The neighbors had been calling for weeks about the smells, the bags, the late-night drives. And I'd helped, too, with my little tip about her digging. It all added up, and now the cops were here, ready to find out what Karen was hiding. She kept pointing at me, yelling, "It's him. It's the chimes." But the cops ignored her. They were at her door now, asking to go inside. Her face was white, her hands were shaking, and she looked scared, really scared. I just sat there, rocking in my chair, the wind chimes still tinkling behind me. This was it, the big reveal. Karen wasn't the perfect rulemaker she pretended to be. She had secrets, and they were about to come out. The neighbors started coming outside, too. They stood on their porches or peeked out their windows, watching the cops at Karen's house. Everyone was whispering, "What's going on, and did you smell that stuff, too?" It wasn't just me, everyone knew something was up with Karen. My wind chimes had made her so mad that she didn't notice everyone else watching her. The cops knocked on her door again, bang, bang, and Karen finally stepped aside. They went in, and she followed, still talking fast, trying to explain. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I didn't need to. The look on her face said it all. She was in trouble. Big trouble. And me? I just sat there, sipping my lemonade, smiling a little. Not because I was mean, but because it was so crazy. The wind chimes kept going ting-ting like they were happy, too. They didn't know it, but they'd started this whole thing. Karen got mad at them, and that made her slip up. She was so busy yelling at me that she didn't hide her secrets good enough. Now the cops were here, and the truth was coming out. What was in those bags? What was she burying? I didn't know yet, but I knew one thing: Karen wasn't the boss anymore. This was the big moment, the climax. Everything I'd seen, the yelling, the flashlight, the bags, the digging, it all led to this. Karen thought she'd get me in trouble, but she got herself caught instead. My wind chimes. They were just a little spark. The real fire was burning at Karen's house now, and it was about to get even wilder. Okay, here we go, this is where it all wraps up. The cops didn't mess around. After they showed up at Karen's house that Friday afternoon, things moved fast. Really fast. They didn't just stand there talking, they went right inside her house to look around. Karen was freaking out, yelling loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is my house," she shouted. "You can't do this. I have rights." Her voice was all high and squeaky, like she was super mad and scared at the same time. But the cops didn't care, they kept doing their job. I was still on my porch, sipping my lemonade, watching it all happen. My wind chimes were tinkling behind me, ting-ting, ting-ting like they didn't even know what was going on. Across the street, the neighbors started coming out of their houses. They stood on their porches or in their yards, whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was up. Everyone was curious, me too. The cops were in Karen's house, and we all wanted to know why. After a little while, the cops came out of her garage. And guess what? They were carrying bags, big bags, but not the black ones I'd seen her with before. These were special bags, like the ones you see on TV shows about police. Evidence bags. That's what they're called, bags they use to hold stuff they find when someone's in trouble. The neighbors gasped, and I sat up straighter in my chair. Evidence bags? That meant something big was happening. The cops kept pulling out more bags, some small, some big. They put them in their cars, moving fast like they knew exactly what they were looking for. Karen was still yelling, following them around, waving her hands. "This is a mistake," she kept saying. "You've got the wrong person." But the cops didn't stop. They just kept working, calm and quiet, while she got louder and louder. Word started spreading fast like wildfire. One neighbor whispered to another, and soon everyone was talking. "She's been doing something bad," someone said. "Really bad," another added. Turns out, Karen had been running some shady business out of her house. Shady means sneaky and not good, like something you're not supposed to do. It wasn't a huge thing, like robbing a bank or anything crazy like that. But it was enough to break a bunch of laws, maybe a dozen. Can you believe it? A dozen laws. Karen, the HOA president who loved rules more than anything, was breaking them herself. She was always telling everyone else what to do: cut your grass, move your car, take down your flowers. She'd fine people for tiny things, like planting ugly flowers or parking an inch too close to the curb. She acted like she was perfect, like she never did anything wrong. But here she was, caught by the cops, doing stuff she wasn't allowed to do. It was so funny in a wow, really, kind of way. Nobody knew exactly what her shady business was yet. Some people said maybe she was selling stuff she shouldn't, like junk she found or stole. Others thought it was about those black bags I'd seen her carrying at night. Maybe she was hiding something in them, like trash she wasn't supposed to dump, or something worse. I didn't know for sure, and the cops didn't tell us right away. But whatever it was bad enough to get her in big trouble. By the end of that day, the sun was starting to go down. The sky turned orange and pink, and it looked pretty over our little street. But all the action was still at Karen's house. The cops finished searching and came outside with her. And guess what? She was in handcuffs. Yep, real handcuffs, shiny and silver, locked around her wrists. She wasn't yelling anymore, she was quiet now, but her face was mad. Really mad. They started walking her to one of the police cars, and that's when she saw me. I was still on my porch, rocking in my chair, my lemonade glass almost empty. The wind chimes were still going ting-ting, soft and happy. Karen looked right at me, her eyes all narrow and angry, and she shouted, "This is your fault." Her voice was loud again, full of blame. "You did this to me," she yelled, pulling against the cops a little as they held her arms. I didn't say anything back. I just waved at her, a little wave, not a mean one. Just a bye, Karen kind of wave. I wasn't mad at her, not really. I was just glad this was over. She kept glaring at me as the cops put her in the back of the car. They shut the door, and she sat there, staring out the window at me and my wind chimes. Then the cars drove away, 1, 2, 3, all gone, taking Karen with them. The street got quiet after that. Really quiet. The neighbors stopped whispering and went back inside their houses. I stayed on my porch for a bit, listening to the ting-ting of my chimes. They sounded even nicer now, like they were saying, "We won." I smiled to myself and finished my lemonade. Karen was gone, and my wind chimes were still here. That felt good, really good. A few days later, something else happened. The neighborhood had an HOA meeting. You know, the homeowners association, the group Karen used to be the boss of. Everyone got together in the community room down the street. I went, too, because I wanted to see what they'd say about Karen. The room was full of people, neighbors I knew and some I didn't. They were all talking about what happened, still shocked about the cops and the handcuffs. One lady stood up. She was the vice president of the HOA, the second in charge after Karen. She said, "We all know what happened with Karen. She's not coming back. She broke the law, and she can't be our president anymore." Everyone nodded, agreeing. Then she said, "We need a new president. Who wants to do it?" The room got quiet. Nobody wanted that job. It was a lot of work, and after Karen, people were a little scared of it. But then someone pointed at me. "What about Jake?" they said. He stood up to Karen with those wind chimes. A few people clapped, and others said, "Yeah, Jake. You'd be great." I was surprised. I didn't expect that. But I thought about it for a second. Me, the HOA president? Why not? So they voted. Everyone raised their hands, and guess what? I won. I was the new HOA president. I couldn't believe it. Just a month ago, I was the new guy with wind chimes, and now I was in charge. It felt funny, but also kind of cool. I stood up and said, "Thanks, everyone. I'll try to be a good president, not like Karen." They all laughed, and it felt nice to be part of the group. The first thing I did as president? I made a new rule. I said, wind chimes are allowed now. Anyone can have them, and nobody gets fined for it. The neighbors cheered really loud. Some people even said, "I'm getting wind chimes tomorrow." It was awesome. After all the fighting with Karen, everyone was happy to have a change. My wind chimes weren't just okay now, they were a big win for the whole neighborhood. Let's picture it one more time. That Friday, the cops took Karen away in handcuffs. She yelled at me, but I just waved, my chimes tinkling in the breeze. They found evidence in her garage, proof she'd been breaking laws. She wasn't the perfect rule keeper she pretended to be, she was the biggest rule breaker of all. And by the end of the day, she was gone, off to face her trouble. Then, at the HOA meeting, they picked me to take her place. Me, Jake, the guy with the wind chimes. I changed the rules so everyone could enjoy what they liked, no more silly fines. The neighborhood felt different after that, happier, freer. People waved at me when I walked by, and some even hung up their own wind chimes. The ting-ting sound started popping up all over the street, and it made me smile every time I heard it. Karen thought she could boss me around, but she was wrong. Her shady business got her caught, and my wind chimes stayed. Justice was served. Karen got what she deserved, and I got to keep what I loved. The neighborhood cheered, and I felt proud. It was a crazy ride, but it ended just right. Alright, let's keep going with the story, it's not over yet. So, after the cops showed up that wild Friday afternoon, everything started moving super fast. They didn't waste any time at all. As soon as they got to Karen's house, they went inside and started searching. Karen was freaking out, she didn't like it one bit. She stood there on her porch, yelling at them with her loud, bossy voice. "This is my house," she shouted over and over. "You can't just come in here. I have rights." Her face was all red, and she waved her arms around like she was trying to scare the cops away. But those cops? They didn't care what she said. They stayed calm and kept doing their job. They walked through her house, looking in rooms, opening closets, checking everything. I was still on my porch, just across the street, sipping my lemonade and watching it all. My wind chimes were still going ting-ting, ting-ting like nothing was happening. But a lot was happening. The neighbors couldn't stay inside anymore. They started coming out of their houses, one by one. Some stood on their porches, some walked into their yards, and a few even came closer to Karen's house to peek. They were whispering to each other, their voices all quiet and excited. "What's going on?" one lady asked. "Why are the cops here?" a guy wondered. Everyone wanted to know. I did, too. I rocked back and forth in my chair, my eyes glued to Karen's place. Then the big moment came. The cops went into Karen's garage, you know, the little building next to her house where she kept her car. They were in there for a few minutes, and when they came out, they were carrying stuff. Not just any stuff, evidence bags. Those are special bags the police use when they find things that prove someone did something wrong. The bags were clear with red tape on them, and you could see there was stuff inside, lumpy shapes, maybe boxes or clothes or something else. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked serious. The neighbors gasped when they saw those bags. "Oh my gosh," one lady whispered. "She's in trouble," a man said. The cops kept pulling out more bags, some big, some small, and loaded them into their cars. Karen was still yelling, following the cops around like a shadow. "This is a mistake," she kept saying. "You've got the wrong house." I didn't do anything. But the cops didn't even look at her, they just kept working, calm and steady. Pretty soon, word started spreading like crazy. One neighbor told another, and then another, until everyone was buzzing about it. "Karen's been doing something bad," someone said. "Really bad," another added. Turns out, she'd been running some kind of sneaky business right out of her house. Shady stuff you're not supposed to do. It wasn't huge, like stealing tons of money or anything wild like that. But it was sneaky enough to break a bunch of rules, maybe 12 whole laws. 12. That's a lot. Can you believe it? Karen, the HOA president who loved rules more than anything, was breaking them herself. She was always bossing everyone around, telling us what we could and couldn't do. Cut your grass shorter, she'd say. Move your car, she'd snap. She'd find people for the silliest things like Tom with his yellow flowers she called ugly, or Sue with her car parked an inch too close to the curb. She acted like she was the queen of the neighborhood, always perfect, always right. But now, she was the biggest rule breaker of all. Nobody knew exactly what her shady business was at first. Some neighbors thought maybe she was selling stuff she wasn't allowed to, like junk she found or stole. Others guessed it had to do with those big black bags I'd seen her carrying at night. Remember those? She'd sneak out late, stuff them in her trunk, and drive off fast. Maybe she was hiding something in them, trash she wasn't supposed to dump, or something even weirder. The cops didn't tell us yet, but whatever it was bad enough to get her caught. By the end of that day, the sun was going down. The sky turned all pretty with orange and pink colors, and the street looked peaceful except for Karen's house. That's where all the action was. The cops finished searching and came outside with Karen. And here's the big part: she was in handcuffs. Yep, real handcuffs, all shiny and metal, locked tight around her wrists. She wasn't yelling anymore, her voice was quieter now, but her face was still mad. Really, really mad. The cops walked her to one of their cars, holding her arms so she couldn't wiggle away. That's when she looked at me. I was still on my porch, rocking in my chair, my lemonade glass almost empty. The wind chimes were tinkling in the breeze, ting-ting soft and happy, like always. Karen's eyes locked onto me, and she glared so hard I could feel it. Then she shouted, "This is your fault." Her voice was loud again, full of anger. "You did this to me," she yelled, pulling against the cops a little. I didn't yell back. I didn't even say anything. I just gave her a little wave, a small, friendly wave, like saying, "See ya, Karen." I wasn't mad at her, not really. I was just glad this whole mess was over. She kept staring at me, her face all scrunched up, as the cops put her in the back of the car. They shut the door with a loud thunk, and she sat there, glaring out the window at me and my wind chimes. Then the cars started up 1, 2, 3, and drove away. Karen was gone, just like that. The street got super quiet after they left. The neighbors stopped whispering and went back inside their houses, closing their doors. I stayed on my porch a little longer, listening to the ting-ting of my chimes. They sounded so nice, like they were celebrating. I smiled to myself and finished the last sip of my lemonade. Karen was in trouble, and my wind chimes were safe. That felt awesome, really awesome. A few days later, something else happened, something cool. The neighborhood had an HOA meeting. That's the homeowners association, the group Karen used to run. We all met in the community room down the street, a little building with tables and chairs where people talk about neighborhood stuff. I decided to go because I wanted to hear what they'd say about Karen. The room was packed, tons of neighbors showed up. Everyone was chattering about the cops, the handcuffs, and Karen's shady business. One lady stood up. She was the vice president, the second in charge after Karen. Her name was Linda, and she had a loud voice so everyone could hear. "Okay, listen up," she said. "We all know what happened with Karen. She broke the law, and she's not coming back. She can't be our president anymore." Everyone nodded, nobody argued with that. Then Linda said, "We need a new president. Who wants the job?" The room got quiet, super quiet. Nobody raised their hand at first. Being HOA president is a big job, lots of work, lots of rules to keep track of. And after Karen, people were a little nervous about it. But then someone spoke up. "What about Jake?" they said, pointing at me. "He stood up to Karen with those wind chimes." Another neighbor clapped and said, "Yeah, Jake's cool. He'd be a good president." More people started nodding and saying, "Jake. Jake." I was shocked. Me? The HOA president? I didn't see that coming. I'd only been in the neighborhood a month, and now they wanted me to be in charge? I sat there for a second, thinking. Karen had made that job all about bossing people around, but maybe I could make it different, better. So I said, "Okay, I'll do it if you want me to. They cheered a big, loud cheer. Then they voted, raising their hands, and guess what? I won. I was the new HOA president. I couldn't believe it. Just a few weeks ago, I was the new guy fighting with Karen over my wind chimes. Now I was the boss of the HOA. It felt weird but also really exciting. I stood up and said, "Thanks, everyone. I'll try to be a good president, not mean like Karen was." They all laughed, and it felt good to see them happy. The first thing I did as president was super fun. I made a new rule, my very first one. I said, wind chimes are allowed now. Anyone can have them, and nobody gets fined for it. The neighbors went wild, they cheered so loud the room shook. Some people even said, "I'm getting wind chimes tomorrow," and finally, no more silly rules. It was the best feeling ever. After all the trouble with Karen, everyone was ready for something nice. Let's picture it one more time, just to wrap it up. That Friday, the cops searched Karen's house and found evidence of her shady business. She yelled and blamed me, but they put her in handcuffs and took her away. She glared at me from the car, shouting, "This is your fault," but I just waved, my wind chimes tinkling behind me. She wasn't the perfect rule keeper she pretended to be, she was a rule breaker, and she got caught. Then, at the HOA meeting, the neighbors picked me to take her place. Me, Jake, the wind chime guy. I changed the rules so everyone could have fun and not worry about silly fines. The neighborhood felt happier after that. People started hanging up their own wind chimes, and the ting-ting sound filled the street. Every time I heard it, I smiled. It reminded me that we won. Karen thought she could scare me into taking my chimes down, but she was wrong. Her sneaky stuff got her in trouble, and my wind chimes stayed up. Justice was served. She got what was coming to her, and I got to keep what I loved. The neighbors cheered, and I felt proud. It was a crazy adventure, but it ended just right, perfectly right. Okay, let's wrap this up with something cool to think about. So, here's the thing, sometimes the people who complain the loudest, who yell and boss everyone around, are hiding the biggest secrets. Yep, it's true. Think about Karen in this story. She was always shouting about rules, telling me to take down my wind chimes, acting like she was perfect. She thought she could control everyone in the neighborhood, me, the neighbors, everybody. She'd stomp over to my house, bang on my door, and say, "Those chimes have to go." But guess what? She didn't see me coming. Nope. She didn't see the truth sneaking up on her, either. Karen acted like she was the big boss, the queen of the street, but she was hiding stuff, shady stuff. Those black bags she carried at night, the digging in her backyard, the weird smells from her house. She thought nobody would notice. She thought she could keep yelling at me about my wind chimes and nobody would look at her. Boy, was she wrong. I stayed quiet, just sipping my lemonade, watching her. I didn't yell back or fight her with big words. I just kept my wind chimes up and waited. And the neighbors? They watched, too. They saw her sneaky moves, and they told the cops. I helped a little, telling them about her digging, but mostly, I let her trip over herself. She was so busy complaining about my tiny ting-ting chimes that she didn't notice the trouble piling up around her. And then bam, it all came crashing down. The cops showed up, not for me, but for her. They found her secrets, put her in handcuffs, and took her away. Karen thought she was in charge, but she wasn't. The quiet ones like me and my wind chimes, we turned the tables on her. She didn't expect that, did she? Nope. The loudest person in the neighborhood ended up being the one with the most to hide. Funny how that works, right? So here's a little tip for you: next time someone picks a fight over something small like a toy, a game, or even wind chimes, stop and think. Ask yourself, what are they really hiding? Maybe they're mad about something tiny because they don't want you to look at the big stuff they're keeping secret. People who yell a lot might be trying to cover something up, just like Karen did. She was loud about my chimes, but quiet about her shady business. Sneaky, huh? Stay curious, friends. Don't just listen to the loud voices, watch what people do. The quiet ones, the ones who don't make a big fuss, they might be the ones who surprise you. Like me. I didn't shout or argue, I just kept my chimes up and let Karen dig her own hole. And when the time was right, the truth came out, and I ended up on top. Pretty cool, right? Think about your own life for a second. Have you ever met someone like Karen? Someone who's always bossing people around, complaining about little things? Maybe they're at school, telling you how to play a game. Or maybe they're at home, mad about something silly like a messy room. Next time that happens, look a little closer. What are they hiding? Are they just noisy because they don't want you to see something else? It's like a mystery, you get to figure it out. Being quiet doesn't mean you're weak. Nope. Sometimes it means you're smart. Sometimes it means you're waiting for the right moment to show what you've got. Karen thought I was just some new guy she could scare, but I showed her. My wind chime stayed, and she got caught. The quiet ones can turn everything around, you just have to be patient and keep your eyes open. This whole adventure with Karen taught me something big. People who act like they're perfect, like they never do anything wrong, might be the ones messing up the most. Karen loved her rules, but she broke a dozen of them. She pointed at me, saying I was the problem, but she was the real troublemaker. It's funny how life works sometimes. The loud complainers get all the attention, but the quiet ones can change the game. So what's the big lesson here? Don't be afraid to stand up for what you like, even if it's something small, like wind chimes. Don't let the loud Karens of the world push you around. Stay curious, stay calm, and watch what happens. You might be the one who turns the tables, just like I did. You might be the one who surprises everybody. What did you think of the story? Did you like how it ended? I hope you did. It was a crazy ride, Karen yelling, cops showing up, wind chimes winning. Tell me what you think in the comments, I really want to know. And here's a fun question, do you have a Karen in your life? Maybe someone who's always bossy or complaining. Who are they? What do they do? Drop it in the comments, I'm super excited to read your stories. This isn't the end forever, just the end of this tale. I'll see you in the next one, friends. Keep being curious, keep being you, and don't let anyone take away your wind chimes or whatever makes you happy. The quiet ones. We've got power, too. See you soon. Let's go over it one more time, just because it's so fun to think about. Karen was loud, super loud. She banged on my door, sent me letters, called the cops, all because of my wind chimes. She thought she could make me do what she wanted. But she didn't know I was watching her sneaky moves, the bags, the digging, the late night drives. She didn't know the neighbors were watching, too. She thought she was the boss, but her secrets were bigger than her rules. When the cops came, it wasn't for me, it was for her. Her loud complaining didn't save her. My quiet waiting did. I kept my chimes, became the HOA president, and made things better for everyone. Karen's big secret came out, and she lost everything, her power, her perfect image, all of it. The loudest complainer fell, and the quiet guy with the wind chimes came out on top. That's the magic of staying curious and not giving up. So next time someone's yelling at you about something little, don't just back down. Think about it. What are they hiding? What's the real story? You don't have to shout, you can just watch and wait, like I did. The truth always comes out, and the quiet ones can win big. Believe in yourself, friends, you've got this. Alright, one last thing before I go. Imagine you're me, sitting on that porch, hearing those chimes ting-ting. Karen's mad, but you're calm. She's loud, but you're smart. She thinks she's winning, but you've got a secret weapon, patience. That's what turned the tables. That's what made the story so cool. What's your secret weapon? Maybe it's being kind, or being brave, or just not giving up. Whatever it is, hold on to it, it's your power. So, what did you think? Fun story, right? I love telling it to you. Hit those comments and tell me, did you like it? Who's your Karen? I can't wait to hear from you. See you in the next one, friends, stay awesome.